Hello, everyone. I'm Beth, and this is Social Leopards. Today, I'm sharing a story about divorce and starting over. This one was really emotional for me. It pulled up some very long ago buried memories for me personally. Salwa is Substack.com creator who has a publication called Quietly Becoming. She explores some of her most raw and deeply personal moments of her life from various perspectives. The stories that she shares include motherhood, mental health, and, of course, as I just shared, divorce. So with that, I am honored to narrate. I didn't start over with a plan. I started over with nothing. What divorce really looked like, and the quiet strength it took to rebuild a life from scratch. Here we go. Divorce didn't feel like freedom. It felt like my entire life collapsed quietly when no one was watching. People like to talk about starting over like it's some kind of empowering milestone, like you make a decision, pack your bags, reclaim your voice, and step boldly into a new chapter. That's not what it looked like for me, not even close. For me, it looked like sitting on a bare floor, filling out housing forms with shaking hands, wondering how I was going to make any of this work. It didn't feel brave. It felt like survival, messy, uncertain, unglamorous survival. There was no cushion to land on, no backup plan, no savings. I had nothing but the clothes we packed in a rush, 2 young children looking up at me for stability I didn't have, and a small studio flat the council gave us as temporary accommodation. 1 room, a tiny kitchenette, a bathroom, and an unfamiliar quiet that stretched across every surface. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, it's echoey. It made me feel more alone than I'd ever felt. Everything had changed. I was no longer someone's wife. I was no longer part of the life I had once built. The title had been ripped away, the partnership dissolved, and the plans we had for the future gone. And now it was just me and 2 little humans I needed to protect and keep warm in a flat that didn't feel like ours. I had to learn everything from scratch. How to apply for the right support, how to get us from point A to point B on buses that never came on time, how to do school mornings when I was running on 2 hours of sleep and a body that hadn't stopped shaking, how to answer my kids' questions without breaking down, how to be strong without even knowing what strength meant anymore. That first night in our new flat, I'll never forget it. The day had been long. We were all exhausted. The kids had finally fallen asleep, tucked up under blankets in a room that still smelled of someone else's history. The boxes were half open, half unpacked, everything unfamiliar and temporary. And I sat down on the edge of the bed with my youngest in my arms. He'd fallen asleep on me, his little chest rising and falling against mine like he still trusted the world to be soft. And in that moment, when I was sure they were both asleep, I let myself cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, tired cry. One of those where the tears slip down your face and you don't even have the energy to wipe them away. I wasn't just crying out of sadness. I was scared. I was overwhelmed. I was relieved to be safe, yes, but I was also deeply unsure of what came next. I had been holding it in for weeks, maybe months. And that night, the weight of it all finally started to come out. What no one really tells you is that when a relationship ends, it's not just the person you lose. It's all the versions of yourself that were tied to that life. You lose the routine, the identity, the rhythm, the version of the future you thought you were building, the sense of who you were in that context. And suddenly you're left with this gaping silence and a version of yourself you don't even recognize. I didn't know who I was anymore. I'd been surviving for so long, functioning, fixing, protecting, that I had no idea what I wanted. I didn't know what I liked. I couldn't even tell you what I needed, but I knew that I had to keep going. I had to keep showing up, even if I didn't feel ready. That's the thing no one says out loud. Sometimes you start again not because you're healed or inspired or confident, but because life gives you no other option, because your children need dinner, because the bins still need taking out, because the world doesn't stop just because your heart has cracked open. When I enrolled in my psychology degree, I was terrified. It was something I had wanted for a long time. I had thought about it, daydreamed about it, even researched the modules in secret, but I kept talking myself out of it. I told myself I wasn't smart enough anymore, that I was too tired, that I wouldn't be able to concentrate, that the kids needed me too much, that I didn't have the space mentally, physically, financially to make it work. But somewhere, deep down, I knew I had to do this. Not just for myself, but for them too. I wanted my children to see me choose something for me. I wanted them to know that even when life knocks you flat, you're still allowed to dream. I wanted them to know that you can be broken and still grow, that you can lose everything and still rise from it. That year was one of the hardest I've ever lived through. There were days where I felt like I was failing in every direction. Days where I forgot school events, missed appointments, cried in the car outside meetings, and then wiped my face clean before stepping inside like nothing had happened. I kept showing up, but it was exhausting. Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. I was doing everything I could, and yet I always felt like it wasn't enough. And the shame. We don't talk about it enough. The shame of starting over, of living in temporary housing, of needing help, of being visibly not okay in a world that expects polished, tidy resilience. The shame of no longer being who you once were or who people expect you to be. Even now, I find myself looking at other people's lives and wondering if I missed a step. The steady relationships, the savings accounts, the clean candlelit homes. I remind myself that social media is a performance, but it still gets under my skin sometimes. It still makes me doubt myself. But slowly, painfully, I've been learning something important. You don't need to perform stability to deserve respect. You don't need to look together to be whole. You don't need to be constantly achieving to be worthy of love. Some days, brushing your teeth is a victory. Some days, warming a bottle of milk for your child while your heart is breaking, that's courage. Some days, just choosing to stay on this planet, in this life, in this moment, is a kind of quiet heroism. And I'm starting to see that now. Strength doesn't always look loud. It's not always big moments and neat outcomes. Sometimes it looks like applying for a course while crying. Sometimes it looks like whispering, "I can't do this," and then doing it anyway. Starting over wasn't beautiful. It was brutal, but it gave me something no one can take away. A kind of quiet, grounded self-respect. The kind that comes from knowing what you've survived, from knowing what it took just to be here. And if you're in that place now where everything feels too much and nothing feels certain, I want you to know this. You're not failing. You are becoming. You are rebuilding something real. And if no one claps for you, I see it. I get it. You're not alone. I didn't start over because I was brave. I started over because I had no choice. But somewhere in all that mess, I found a strength that was mine, one that had nothing to prove and no one to impress. Just a woman, standing quietly in her truth, refusing to give up. And I think that counts for something. With love, Salwa. Wow. First of all, if this resonated with you, be sure to head over to the show notes and grab the link to Salwa's Substack account. I'm sure she would truly appreciate any comments or likes that you have to share. In reflection of what she had to say here, I mentioned earlier how deeply this moved me. Losing your identity, having to truly start over, and then finding time for things like pursuing your education or a career path of any kind, while simultaneously just surviving day by day, especially with little ones. Trying to show resilience to your children, even though inside you feel practically destroyed most days. And then finally, finding that strength and finding that hope. The journey itself is never predictable, right? And I've experienced, and I've also heard countless stories from others, relating to how complex and seemingly impossible it is to be faced with starting over. And I know that I spent many a late night crumpled up in a heap, crying for hours, trying to figure out my next steps. It literally took years to regain my full self-esteem and feel like I was going to achieve long-term relief. And I guess the good news is that in my case, at least, I finally did stumble across another good human who brought me back to life and showed me that true happiness could again be part of my reality. I do want to take a few moments to highlight some of the really great stuff that I got from this article. First was the power of quiet resilience. Salwa's account gently underscores that real strength is often found, not in loud declarations, but in the quiet daily refusal to give up, despite any overwhelming circumstances. It's a really powerful message for people who might feel like they're unseen in their struggles. Another had to do with the sense of being seen in the darkness. The phrase, "even if no one claps for you, I see it," is especially meaningful to me. There's a deep sense of validation and some empathy there. It speaks to anyone moving through invisible battles, and it reminds us of the importance of community and bearing witness to each other's journeys. Then there's unconditional self-compassion throughout this article. It's a subtle thread seen quite often, as she writes, if you read any of her other stuff. A gentle reminder that surviving and rebuilding and simply continuing on are those accomplishments in themselves, even if the progress seems minimal or it's only realized at a pace that's a lot slower than what your heart wants to see. I really wish there had been this type of content out there on the internet way back when I was going through my divorce and the aftermath that followed. Knowing that there are so many stories out there of pain that is followed by strength and hope would have been way more encouraging to me than sitting alone in my own pain, trying to figure it all out. A lot of my friends at the time were either taking sides or were happily married, and I had very few people I could lean on to work through this with community, at least at the beginning. And I think a lot of people find themselves in that spot. It's really quite difficult. Okay, I think that was everything I wanted to say. A final thank you to Salwa for allowing me to share this story with you today. All right, moving on to a brief highlight for next week. I'll be sharing eldest daughter syndrome with you. It's an essay on feeling that burden, growing up too soon, and the life lessons that followed. For now, I'll move on and say, until next week, take care.